So with the $2 per meter per month for opting out, and then all other costs would be socialized. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, but you have to be a little careful about what you mean by socializing. I still think there's a lot of room here for some shareholder responsibility.
Okay, thank you. And Marzia has a question from them.
Question from Tiffany Dries from Edison Territory. She says, sorry to be redundant, but would we still have to pay the 1.6% increase on our Edison bill for the smart meter if we decide to opt out?
So the answer to that is what we've been talking about as the cost of the system. As we communicate to customers and go into every new district where we install meters, as part of our outreach, we do talk about the costs that are part of the overall rate structure to fund the program that we're putting into place. So that is the only program that is authorized at this time for Southern California Edison, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Go ahead.
Going back to the Maine case again, Maine did include a credit for an avoided smart meter installation.
If I may, please, I wasn't completely accurate in my statement. The $40 initial charge and $12 a month is for someone that currently has an analog meter. And for someone that has a smart meter and wants to change out to the analog meter, the one-time charge will be $90 instead.
Thank you. Mr. Martino,
Okay. In
the microphone, please. I can't hear you.
in my proposal for this workshop, I raised the question of costs in general, given that we're here in this workshop because there have been so many complaints on a health, injury, and harm basis from the installation of these smart meters. What the utilities are saying, if they are going to charge a cost for opting out, is tantamount to, we will install something that is harmful to you, and if you don't want it, you're going to have to pay us money. Now, that's a very brief definition of a protection racket. In other words, to charge money for this is to be guilty of extortion.
Mr.
Can I have a comment on that?
Okay, the smart meters and the opt-in bill, whether or not you believe that we should be charged for the, or for proposing that ratepayers be charged for the opt-out. My understanding is you're saying no, we should not be charged. The ratepayers should not be charged for opting out. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm giving a rationale.
Okay,
that is legal.
Okay, and I know that is a legal issue that you have raised. We can brief that. We don't need to argue it at this point. Okay, thank you. And why don't we go with that for the for a no cost to the parties opting out. That would require that those costs then be allocated to all of the ratepayers. And the question then is, why should other ratepayers be subsidizing an opt-out?
May I respond to that?
You may.
Okay.
Yeah, just get on the microphone.
I don't think that all ratepayers should have to pay for that. That is, the cost for no cost opting out should, I think, be borne by the shareholders of the utilities as private corporations, given that
Okay,
They have
okay,
taken
yes,
the risk.
Yes, but I think we've already discussed this morning. This is an authorized program. They've been authorized by this commission. If we authorize them to offer opt-out programs, that cost will be recovered by ratepayers.
Well, then you're
Okay,
assuming
and-
the
well,
answer
Mr.
to the
Martinez,
question you just asked.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask why you felt it was appropriate. You know, that you are proposing it. We will consider having these costs borne by other ratepayers, but I would like to get some understanding of your rationale of why other ratepayers should bear the cost of opting
And I
out.
don't think they should.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Maurer.
Thank you. So I'm not going to answer your question, but I had another question, and that is, has anyone at any of the utilities or at the PUC looked into the legality of charging people for retaining their old meters? So basically, people feel that why should they have to pay for nothing? They're not getting anything. So
Okay.
has anyone looked into the legality of that charge?
Okay, and Mr. Wilner is here. The Maine Commission has done that. Okay, this is an opt-out program, and the cost for the opt-out by the Maine Commission had determined there should be a cost to opt out, whether it be to adopt an analog or a radio off, and that those costs are partially borne by the ratepayer and partially socialized. Okay, we are going to be considering that as well. Okay. Okay, yes, right there, yes, here.
One case for the free opt-out is, I guess the question is, has anybody looked into the legality of the American Disabilities Act as well? Because right now there's a number of countries in Europe who have now recognized the electrosensitivity issue as now a recognized disability and such. It just seems that once you start charging people, and if they claim health issues, it's opening up this whole can of worms for class action lawsuits and discrimination issues. So has anyone actually looked into the American Disabilities Act?
Under the ADA, electrosensitivity is not considered a disability. If you would like to give me a case that is contrary to what I've been told, it would be more than happy to receive it. Okay. Okay, Mr. Tobin, please.
Your Honor, I just have a clarification request. You indicated that the cost would be socialized or allocated to the opting out folks. It's my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, of the prior authorization decisions that the utilities are depending on here for their authority to proceed, that there was fairly careful language of the Commission saying that these costs are not being deemed reasonable at this point, or proper or improper for being included in the rate base before you ever even get to the question of how are these rate base costs allocated or socialized. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding when you talk about authorization, I don't think you're saying that the Commission has found that whatever monies are spent belong in the rate base at all. That's not been determined, unless I'm wrong.
No, you're correct. That is not part of this proceeding either.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Watt.
I have a question for you, Your Honor. I thought I heard you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the Commission has decided that opt-out costs should either be socialized or paid by the customers opting out. And I don't recall the Commission ever saying anything like that in a decision.
Oh, not this commission. I was talking about the Maine Commission.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. So,
Just reading from the Supreme Court case San Diego versus Superior Court, where Justice Mosk talks about that the Commission, and this is as of 1996, ordered utilities to implement no-cost and low-cost steps to reduce or mitigate electric and magnetic fields. The Commission, referring to the CPUC, defined low cost to mean approximately 4% of the total cost of a project, and ordered the utilities to use the 4% figure as a benchmark in developing their mitigation guidelines. So my question is, have there been mitigation guidelines developed in the smart meter deployment? And number two, if there is still an active CPUC benchmark for 4%, that seems to accord somewhat with PG&E's figures for the number of ratepayers that want to opt out. Wouldn't that, in effect, be the mitigation covered under those guidelines?
No, okay, we're not, the smart meter deployment is, okay, Mr. Trial, you want to pass it away? Okay, can you wait for a microphone?
The case cited doesn't apply. Number one, it's EMF. Number two, that's for unintentional emissions, and RF on the meters are intentional.
This is Cindy Sayes. I was actually a member of the governor's appointed EMF consensus group that made recommendations that were adopted in a decision in 1993 that authorized no and low cost mitigation, so I'm very familiar with this. Electromagnetic fields includes both ELF, EMF from transmission lines and appliances and radio frequency radiation. I see that there is a very good question asked that ought to be pursued.
Okay, it's not in this proceeding, unfortunately. There is a smart grid deployment. I don't know if it would be considered there or somewhere else.
What's the question?
This is why it's here.
What's the cost?
In the Supreme Court case of San Diego Gas and Electric?
No. I just want to respond. It is not being considered in the smart grid deployment plan. And I think what you're referring to refers to the EMF from the transmission lines, not from the EMF from RF or EMF from smart meters. So it has, the two are entirely different.
In the case, it does include new and upgraded facilities.
But they're referring to the transmission lines, sir, the substations, not smart meters.
I believe there is broader language in the decision.
There was radio frequencies included in that.
I just wanted to clarify really quickly. So this could be a possibility that, let's say if I paid money to opt out, so I pay the upfront fee and then the monthly fee, it's a very real possibility that the utility could still come and put one of the repeaters just directly in front of my house if I have a power line 20 feet away from my bedroom window. Is that an actual possibility?
I suppose theoretically, we do estimate that depending on how many people opt out, we would have to put in fill-in network devices on utility assets and utility rights of way.
So would there be any way to opt out of having a repeater placed in front of my house? I know this is it seems to perpetuate the same problems, so we might be talking about this for years with a wireless solution.
Okay, I think we're going to need to think about that. So there is. Okay, go ahead, Tom.
I just wanted to follow up on as I was thinking about what Maine had done and put in a credit for an avoided smart meter. If we do come up with an opt-out alternative here, whether it's analog, something other than a radio off with the existing meter, would you actually avoid purchasing a meter for that customer, a smart meter for that customer that would have been paid for under the original AMI business case, or not? And I think each utility, if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
We've replaced $3 million at $5 million, so there's $2 million to go. So depending on when that decision came forward, and if it was a decision that required us to have that option, yes. But I think we'd have to, there are more considerations, as we mentioned, the unraveling an AMI case and all the separate uses that wrapped up the benefits and made it a positive business case.
Yeah, Tom, and like I said, we're at 86%, and we will buy the last smart meter before it's installed. So to Ken's point, a little bit of this is the time, whether there will be an avoided smart meter or not.
And obviously from SDG&E's perspective, we're at 98%, and most likely we're going to have bought all the smart meters by the time this proceeding is finished.
Just to get an idea of that, how far in advance of installing a meter would you typically buy one and put it in inventory?
Actually, I'm going to have to defer to my deployment director on that. I believe 6 months, but let's get a clear answer.
Yeah, we place our gin cherry here with Southern California Edison. So we actually do our planning 6 months in advance. So from a manufacturing perspective, we try to give the manufacturers some lead time so they can get efficient buying of components and to reserve space on their production line. Thereafter, we place the order and we firm it up every month as we get closer towards it, and then we're locked in 30 days before the meter is manufactured. And then another 2-3 weeks after that, we actually take delivery. So for a rule of thumb, at least a couple of months before we actually take delivery of the product.
Okay, another question, kind of that Tom's question reminded me of. The Maine Commission also had adopted more than one opt-out option, and I'm open to considering more than one opt-out option here as well. With respect to costs, does having more than one opt-out option increase costs, decrease costs? Do they stay the same?
Again, we haven't really drilled into this deeply, but favoring the radio on, radio off, that would be our preferred method. It does look on the surface to be the most cost-effective approach. For us, some of the other approaches like the analog and so forth require significant back office changes or duplicate systems.
So, PG&E, we do think that at least in small ways it almost has to increase costs to carry multiple options. Because of inventory and carrying, a lot of things stay the same. So for example, we talked about this mesh degradation and required to fill it in. Well, either because they have an analog meter, a digital radio out meter, or the radio's off would all look the same in that respect. But for us to both carry an analog meter and or carry the toolkit to do the radio off, for example, would just require more cost from our technicians.
For SDG&E, we looked at the 3 options, radio off, solid state, and analog, and to be honest, the costs are all about the same from our perspective. Now, we did not look at doing combinations of any of the 2. I would expect there would be a slight increase based on some of the examples Jim just provided.
Okay, thank you.
All right, going back a bit to analog meters. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and there was a thing called Economy 7, where we had your analog meters, and there was this gizmo that was attached. And at 7 o'clock, a flag was hit, and so basically there was cheaper electricity at night, which makes all the savings that I've seen on the smart meter program is getting customers to do their laundry and air conditioning at night. So I think there are 1970s era technology which can take care of all this problem. We should at least look into that.
Okay, 1970s technology. So that's from 40 years ago. Is that?
Right, it
are
worked.
those? I'm sure it did. But the question is whether or not those meters or that type of technology is still there and available for everyone since then.
It would be a very simple job to have. You can use the firmware and do a firmware upgrade in a smart meter just to have a switch. Okay, from 7 p.m. onwards, store this much, and when it gets back to peak, store it again. So you have two different numbers. So, and that would preclude having to broadcast 24/7, which in fact they do when they're in grids of.
So,
40 or more.
I guess is the question then, and maybe it's kind of triggered a question for me, is okay, you transmission 4 times daily, 6 times daily, whatever it is. Is there the ability to transmit less frequently, and what do you lose in terms of interval
monthly.
information that will take, well, whatever the period is, some shorter period of time, but tracking, and what do you lose or gain from doing that?
Well, the reasons they broadcast in the periodic nature they do is because that was determined to be kind of the balance point of the best reliability of the system. In that you're accommodating a notion that you know at times you will lose some reads due to whatever network traffic or real-world phenomena going on. So they've been tuned to where they think they give you the best opportunity to get all of the reads ultimately. I kind of got it, with all due respect, I got to go back and just for a second and say, in these smart meter systems, all the benefits are not due to even energy shifting or time use.
That's enough. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Mr. Wilmer?
Thank you, Your Honor. Comment, please, if I may. Wilmer Associates works with people that have health concerns relating to smart meters. And we have spoken with them about the opt-out proposal that we made. And they've told us that the cost, as we proposed, and hopefully close to what the commission will decide upon, is very, very small to them compared to the doctor bills and the hospital bills that they incur trying to deal with the symptoms that they suffer. So I think that should be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Bauer?
I hear what Mr. Roller is saying. I wanted to add to that, though, in neighborhoods where you have, like my family, we have a note from the doctor that we should have smart meter on our house. So for us to have a neighborhood that was smart meter free, every one of our neighbors would have to pay to not have a smart meter, and that would be very, very hard for us. We would be forced to move. So I wanted to add that. But I also wanted to question, you had asked about the cost difference between the retaining an analog meter, having the radio off, and then replacing the smart meter with an analog meter, and the response was, well, these would be all the same cost. And I'm having a hard time understanding that, because if I have an analog meter on my house, there's no cost for anyone to change it or do anything. It's going to be the same meter coming around. But if you're turning the radio off, I can see there'd be a cost to come out and turn the radio off. And if you're switching out that meter from a smart meter to and back to the analog, there would be a cost for that. But I don't see the statement that they're all going to cost the same, and I'd like some clarification on that, please.
That was a statement from SDG&E. The main reason is, I keep on repeating myself, we're 98% deployed. We have very few analog meters. Basically, from looking at the cost, we average it over ranges of folks, and we're saying that the standard cost would be the same for all the folks. Now, there could be variances based on do they already have an analog meter or not. We haven't gotten into that detail. I was asked to come up with some range costs, and it's basically, my response was that basically for the three ranges, all the same. And the main reason is if we have to go get analog meters, we have to go out and purchase them. If we have to purchase digital meters, we have to purchase digital meters. If we have to turn the radio off, we have to turn the radio off. They all require truck rolls.
I think the situation is different for each utility, but I think Edison is the best example when they're about 50% deployed. For those people that haven't got a smart meter, maybe the cost is lower. But how do we set up a program that's fair to everybody, including those people who didn't get an opportunity to opt out and those people that did? And that's a question that we as ratepayer advocates don't have an answer to, but we really need to be thoughtful of, because the answer to that will depend on each utility's deployment schedule.
Person? Did you have anything?
Marcel Hubbard with Turner. I have a question about going forward, what your intent is with respect to additional information concerning RF, because Turn has taken no position on the health impacts of the meters, but I heard you say today that the goal is to design an opt-out option for whatever reason, or that the reasons is not taken into account. Nevertheless, there's a problem here in that at least a couple of the options, for example, the option of electric radio off, but continuation of the gas meter radio signals, or I think Mr. Aglet's recommendation of a safe zone. Those options, so to speak, I think would only apply to individuals who are making the opt-out choice specifically out of concern about some RF emission impact. And to evaluate whether to even advocate for that option, and certainly for a customer to then evaluate whether to choose such an option, depends entirely on being able to make some informed choice or conclusion about is there a difference between the gas module emissions versus the electric emissions? Do I need to be worried about emissions that are 10 feet versus 20 feet away? I know there's a motion pending that filed by DRA, which Turn supported, requesting that utilities at least provide basic data without necessarily having the commission evaluate what the health impacts may or may not be. And I'm curious, prior to any parties having to submit testimony proposing alternatives, whether you intend to rule on that motion or require the utilities to provide any such data that would allow us to evaluate at least those particular options.
Okay, I am considering those motions right now, and we'll be ruling at some point in the future. Okay, thank you.
Well, the first question is really quick. Is there going to be another workshop?
Okay. At this point, when we finish, I will be meeting with staff and also with the assigned office. We'll be discussing whether or not another workshop is needed.
Well, one thing that I'd like to recommend for a next workshop is I'm a little disappointed, and maybe this was our side being here in the audience, is that there's no one from the telecom industry here. I know Google right now is doing Google Fiber. I know that Chattanooga did a fiber network. There's a number of other fiber networks going on right now. And so far, everyone who's stated what the cost of transmitting over the telecom lines would be has been stated by wireless network providers, who obviously have a stake in thinking that their technology is the best and only answer. So I'd like to hear a more balanced side of the story from the telecom companies to get a true cost, because I really honestly don't think that there needs to be a dedicated line that would cost $30 a month. I think this data could be, anyway.
I'll take that under
the
consideration.
telecom company side.
I'll consider that. Okay? Yes.
Yeah, very briefly. My agreement with being in San Francisco with PG&E is I give them money, they provide me joules. The only number they need to know is how many joules did I use in a billing cycle, and that's a number. And if it went to tiered pricing, 2 numbers, off-peak, peak. I just have a problem with the amount of data that's having to go back and forth, and then having to pay to not have to supply data 100 times a day, say.
This is a response from PUC staff. That data is for you. The point of the smart meter is to give you the information, give you the hourly information. If you want to change your behavior and make a choice, you are able to do so. Right now, you get your information at the end of the month, after the fact, and you're not able to reduce your bill if you wanted to for that month. So one of the benefits of the smart meter is to give you hourly information the day of or the next day, so then you can make changes and reduce your bill for that month. It's not so much for the utility.
I didn't ask for that.
Okay. That's okay. We'll go here and then to the Sage.
Well, I'd just like to respond to that. I don't want to be adversarial, but they just found that, there was a study done that 70% of people don't shop around for auto insurance. They just buy it from the first website they go to. I think the vast majority of people are not really going to look at these charts, and they're not really done real time. And I was having a discussion with someone else from PG&E. that same information could be given just on a monthly basis. And so you could educate yourself very quickly just looking at 1 month's bill without needing to have this constant transmission going on. You could basically learn to just do your laundry at night.
Okay. Ms. Sage.
Your Honor, I'd like to underscore the importance of having some information from the utilities and their vendors that they can provide it that would allow consumers to make an informed decision about whether it's worth it or not to pay these charges for whichever opt-out program or any of those programs is eventually selected. And that is, there seems to be a very large disconnect between the amount of traffic on the meter that utilities say is actually reporting usage and the overall traffic on these meters, which is nearly constant. Would it be possible for them to explain whether part of this is due to simply mesh network keeping it healing and keeping itself, chatting along, versus these very infrequent power usage reporting signals? Because we simply do not understand which is which and what will be paid for in an opt-out program without that information.
Are any of you able to respond at this point, or?
I think we're deferred on that.
Okay.
Yes, I can respond to that and as well as the previous point. So we have provided data to EPRI and to other third parties as to the duty cycle of the transmitter. That data supports our assertion that less than 0.1% of the time, in fact it was very close to 0.05% of the time we're actually transmitting. So I respectfully disagree based upon the data we've seen that there's anywhere close to constant transmission happening on the part of the devices. In terms of why the devices are communicating at times other than the 6 hours, the 6 times a day that the back office is requesting data, that is to maintain the communication capability on mesh, and as I think has been discussed as other uses, right, that currently it can be used to provide outage and restoration data, it can be used for other services, it can be used for the service of providing data into the home area as another potential vehicle. And then on kind of that front, there actually is very recent, and by recent I mean within the last 12 to 18 months, data that does strongly suggest that consumers do alter their behavior based upon being informed about what their usage is and being given price signals to encourage off-peak usage. And so I believe there's, probably all the utility representatives in the room are fully aware of that data.
Thank you.
Is there a percentage possible of chatter versus signal?
Sorry, that data I don't have, but I do completely agree with PG&E's assertion that data is being requested from the meters approximately, exactly 6 times a day. There's automatic retries built in if, on a given attempt, you can't successfully communicate. I think you can understand, given the nature of a mesh network, if I'm trying to talk to meter A and I have to get to meter A through meter B, then I'm going to you're going to see twice as much transmission on meter B as you will meter A in order to get those reads. So that's kind of the inherent nature of the mesh network.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Meadows.
Just to follow up on that question, I think earlier you said that PG&E's system communicates 45 seconds a day.
Correct.
Does that figure include some kind of an average of all traffic on the network, just to transmit usage?
That's in total.
That's total.
In total.
And that's averaged over typical scenarios of relaying messages from one node point to another?
Yeah, I'm not sure the sample size of the meters. I believe it was extensive, but that is taking data coming from the communications module itself as to when it transmits. It keeps track of all that information and the calculations based upon that.
And one follow-up, I know that in the EPRI report on the Itron meters, there were surveys that were done by Edison and PG&E that showed histograms of how that duty cycle varied across a population in a particular time. Has PG&E and Silver Springs provided similar information to Devore?
As far as I know, we have. And there certainly are periods of time where there might be increased traffic, for example, in the middle of performing a firmware upgrade. Right, that's much more voluminous data being transmitted, and there's then very active peer-to-peer communication happening within the network to transfer that firmware image reliably and securely. But on average, I'll go off the top of my head here, we're upgrading devices probably no more frequently than once a year. So that's a very infrequent occurrence.
Okay, right here.
Hi, point of clarification. This testing that you did, is this from a single meter in line of sight to a base station, or, for example, like a bank of 40 meters where you took, well, like meter A will be talking through all the way through meter Z and, further on? Because we've actually taken measurements and there's constant chatter with very high spikes. And it completely contradicts PG&E 45-second thing. That's completely bogus. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the data that I'm referring to was gathered across 88,000 meters actually in production in PG&E's service territory today. So it's actual meters, not lab meters. I think we would certainly be happy to look at any other data that you have.
Absolutely, yeah.
And certainly go analyze that and make sense of that. So happy to do that at any point.
I don't know if this is feasible whatsoever, but I know there's smart meters here in San Francisco. I have a meter reader right now, a RF meter. I know other people in the audience do. Is there any chance we could take a field trip after this and just show how much signals are going? Because they keep saying that it's not. I know 50 people have gone out and taken readings, and it's consistently every 4 or 5 seconds there's a transmission going on. No question about it.
Is there a field trip in Yip-Kikugawa?
There's no field trip. I have to go home and feed my kids.
Can I potentially ask a follow-up to that? I think what I heard Silver Springs say is there can be transmissions on not constant, but frequently. But is it that those are very short messages to establish the network? So if you have an averaging meter, it might show a lot happening. But if you look at the time of each and sum them over a day, that summation is 45 seconds.
Correct.
Perhaps it would be useful to read from a very short segment from the EPRI report, Principal Investigator Rick Tell, dated December 2010, titled An Investigation of Radio Frequency Fields Associated with the Itron Smart Meter. So it is specific to that. Rick Tell's an expert we all acknowledge. And his concluding paragraph says, in reality, the transmitter activity of smart meters is best described in a statistical fashion, since it is not possible to define if and when a smart meter will transmit how often with absolute accuracy. Given the nature of mesh networks, hundreds of meters are interacting with one another in a way to form connections between the various meters and ultimately the cell relay meter. The activity of this interaction leads to variability in the activity of each. Hence, measurements are not expected to necessarily be indicative, and it goes on and so on. But in this, there are 7 references in the conclusion section only to the unpredictability and the uncertainty of traffic.
Yeah, so Cindy, I don't think we're disagreeing. I think Rick is accurately concluding, and I think Itron SSN would agree that the traffic pattern on any individual meter at any point in time is difficult to predict because it's based upon what's going on around its neighbors. So that's why taking a large sample size and measuring over an extended period of time is critical. So we consider the 88,000 meters to be a significant enough sample to be relevant.
Okay. Let's take one last question or a couple last questions. I think we are getting close to the end of the day. would like to wrap up. Okay, Ms. Maurer.
Thank you so much. The Silver Springs Network vendors said that he didn't think that the smart meter pulses were constant. Itron had done an open wave survey of 7,000 meters and found the maximum duty cycle for that, the maximum duty cycle was 497 seconds. I think that's about 8 minutes. And that computates down to about 2 pulses per second. So I want to know, I mean, how do you define constant? If that's not constant, I don't know. So comment, please.
Sorry, I think my definition of constant is the transmitter is constantly emitting energy into into the environment. So 2 pulses per second, assuming those pulses are not each a half second, would not be constant.
Agreed. We would agree.
Okay.
This is the last question. Go ahead.
Oh, over here.
Well, I think by that definition, you would say that a strobe light is not constantly on, and trying to sleep with a strobe light on in your bedroom is saying that it's not constantly on. So in sort of conclusion, what I'm taking from this is the wireless is problematic, and if the solution to opting out is to add more wireless repeaters in that same neighborhood to fill in that void, I think this is going to continue to have problems that are going to be discussed for a long time. So I hope we can really explore more wired options and get the telecom companies in here to offer solutions, because I'm sure they'd be happy to offer solutions that would be cost effective.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and this gentleman here.
I don't.
Well, it's not on. It's on. It's on.
Okay. I'm over 70 years old. I'm actually 77 years old. And I was born in San Francisco, and I've lived here all my life. But what I'm getting at, I qualify for the care option. And I'm directing this to the PG&E representative. How do you rationalize charging me $100 to $250 for a setup fee where I have had for decades a analog meter in my home, and I am going to keep it? And how would you rationalize me paying you $100 to $250 a month, not a month, but for setups? Where does the money go for me?
Yes, it is unfortunate, as we've been talking about all day, that the cost of a opt-out program, when it's going to, in all likelihood, be a very minor number of customers. Unfortunately, there's, like Ms. Brown talked about first thing this morning, there's a large amount of costs that need to be accounted for against a very small count of customers. And we are adjusting for low income in the care option in the PG&E proposal, doing our best to make it affordable, but we have the unfortunate circumstance that we have a certain amount of money to collect in order to enable this program.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's go on to the next steps, everyone. I'm going to be meeting with staff and also with the assigned commissioner's office. We'll be discussing the opt-out proposals that had been submitted, as well as going over our notes from today's workshop. What we're thinking of is potentially submitting, or having staff prepare a straw proposal, rather than, and I think it's the multiple proposals that have come in. I would like staff to send out a staff proposal, have everyone file comments and reply comments on that proposal, and then we'll go forward from there. Another point is that there was a notice of a pre-hearing conference set for tomorrow that was accidentally sent out. There is no pre-hearing conference tomorrow. For the various proceedings, I will be setting up a pre-hearing conference. It's just not going to be tomorrow. Is there anything else today? I know it's been a very long day. I really appreciate everybody coming here. Mr. Wellner, why don't I give you one last question?
This is a procedural question. Do you still intend to have evidentiary hearings?
That is part of our discussion tomorrow with the Commissioner's Office and staff. We will come up with the remainder of the schedule, and we will also be putting together the schedule for the next pre-hearing conferences. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.